might remember me. I'm Father Darren Colarusso. I'm the pastor of St. Monica and St. Lucie parishes. And today I'm going to do a little lesson for you on the soul and what it means to have a soul and what it means to be in communion with God because He gave us a soul. Mr. Jackson has sent out weekly topics, and this was the one we covered in last week's Mass, and I know you couldn't be with us, so we thought the lesson itself is still important to do. So what is a soul? What is a soul? The first thing to think about is a soul is just the word we give to the principle of life of something that is alive. Okay, so you say, well, why is a plant alive? Why does an animal have life? Why does a human being have life? We say, well, the principle of that life is a soul. Now, when we think about souls, we typically think of human souls, but it is not incorrect to say that plants and animals have souls if you understand that correctly. So as an example, what does a plant do? A plant doesn't move. A plant just grows, right? A plant takes the chemicals out of the soil and it creates its own, it has life by doing that. And, a plant has a chemical soul, a vegetative soul, we would call it. That's what plants do. Animals, being a little more sophisticated, higher on the hierarchy of life there, they have motion and they can sense things where a plant can't sense things. So their soul does what? It's the same thing that a plant soul does. Their soul has digestion and growth like a plant does, but also provides them movement. And they can perceive, like they can perceive. An animal can react to its surroundings. Animals, in fact, you might know, they can, like your dog, can dream, and they have emotions. These are all part of an animal's soul, its principle of life. Now, the thing that is most important to understand about this is their principle of life is contained in the material world. It is from the material realm. So we have a very high appreciation for what nature can do in and of itself as a creation of God. The soul of an animal, the soul of a plant, we don't say like plants die and go to heaven, but they have a principle of life. What does this mean for us? What makes a human being different from a plant and an animal? A human being, right? We digest, we grow. So to a certain extent, our soul provides that chemical vegetative process where, like animals, we can move and we can walk and we can react. We can dream. We have passions, things like that. We are embodied, right? Animals have an embodied biological. We are partly that too. So our soul does that too. But what makes us different? We have a spiritual soul. Our one spiritual soul does all these three things. What does that mean to have a spiritual soul? We are made in the image and likeness of God. It means we have an intellect and a will. Okay? That means, what do we do that animals cannot do? We can think. Sometimes we don't appreciate what thinking really is. It isn't just reacting to your world. Like you can see lions, they can go after a gazelle, and you can see them kind of planning and figuring out what they're doing. That's not thinking. That's reacting. It's perhaps an instinct. It's very impressive, but it's not thinking. It's not pondering truth. It's not dealing with things outside the material realm. If I were to ask you, how much does truth weigh? How big is truth? Truth, right and wrong, these are spiritual realities. These are realities that are not material. And so our capacity of our soul to deal with these spiritual realities, it demonstrates that we have a spiritual soul that God gave us. Why did He give us a spiritual soul? So that we could have communion with God, so we can know God and love God. That's why we're made. We aren't angels. Angels are strictly spiritual, and we're not rocks. They're nothing. And we're not animals, and we're not plants. We have a certain position in creation where we're both body and spirit, body and spiritual soul. And so this is a tremendous gift that we have. But the big thing is it allows us to have spiritual actions, to pray, right? to choose right and wrong. If I'm walking down the street, right, I'm no different. I can do a human action that has no moral content. I can walk down the street, just like a dog walking down the street. But if I'm walking down the street to go rob a bank, right, that has moral content. That's a spiritual action, right? If I'm walking down the street and I see a homeless person and I help that homeless person by giving them $1, that's a moral action. That's a spiritual action, right? That's not just walking down the street. Now I have a human content. Now I have a spiritual content to my actions. Why is this kind of important? Remember I said we're both body and spirit. We're body and spiritual soul. So it's important to realize that what we do, the actions we undertake, affects our souls. As an example, you would not say if you're fighting with your brother or sister, right, and you smacked your brother or sister, and you're going to get in trouble, and Dad comes up and says, "Why did you hit your sister?" And you wouldn't go, "Oh, Dad, I didn't hit my sister. My hand hit my sister." No, the action that you took was you. You did it. The soul, you did it in your soul. The body was your instrument. But it's important to realize our body and our souls are a unity. We call it a composite. We're a composite creature. This is very important because what we do affects our souls, and how we live affects, if you will, our bodies and our happiness. And so it's important to realize that what we undertake shapes who we are. How we live shapes who we are. The life we live, moral or immoral, how our communion with God works, affects our soul. When we grow, it's funny because when you think about it, all the work that you do in school, how we grow to be good people, we don't just say, I've got a good body, or I'm learning to play the instrument, right? Your soul is changing. It's your soul that's becoming a mature person, a spiritual person, a truthful person, a good person, or a bad person. And so our actions, our moral choices affect us. God, in his creation, has laws, right? So let's get back to the physical world again, like we were talking about the animals and stuff. There's the law of gravity. I can't just say because I want to, I'm going to jump off the roof and defy the law of gravity. I'm going to defy the law of gravity. No, if you jump off the roof, you're going to demonstrate the law of gravity. You're going to smack on the ground. You're going to hurt yourself, if not kill yourself. Same thing with the moral law of God. All the things that we're supposed to do in relationship with God, in relationship with one another, have laws. So the Lord is telling us, we think of the 10 Commandments. He's saying, I don't want you to live in a way that is harmful to your soul. I don't want you to lie. It's harmful to your soul. I don't want you to steal. I don't want you to engage in sexual activity outside of marriage. I don't want you to kill another human being, right? And I want you to be in communion with me. I want you to worship and to love and to pray. That's what all the commandments are. And again, it's not just say, don't do this, don't do that, don't have fun. The Lord is telling us that to engage in these activities is dangerous for us. It's against how we're made. It's against the fact that we're made to do what? To know and love God and our neighbor. That's the ultimate purpose of our soul, right? To love, to know the truth. And if we do these things, not only are we, quote unquote, breaking the commandments, we're harming our soul. Just no differently than if we would harm our body by doing something stupid, like jumping off a bridge. When mom and dad says, if all the kids were jumping off a bridge, would you go jump off with them? No, just because everyone else is doing it doesn't mean it's good for them. Somebody had this great example, in a car. If you don't keep your car taken care of well, you don't put the radiator fluid in there, you don't get the oil change, eventually, you're going to get like a warning light, or something's going to start going wrong. The dial's going to go wrong because the car is breaking down. Our consciences, when we do something wrong, we feel bad about it. That's like our conscience, like a warning light in a car. You're doing something wrong. You're harming your soul. You're doing something contrary to love. You're doing something contrary to truth. You're doing something contrary to God. Again, God wants us to be in communion with him, wants us to be in relationship with him, made us with an intellect and a will to know and to love him. And when we sin, we harm our soul. And when we do what we're supposed to do, we allow our souls to grow into communion with love of God. That's why we have to learn the truths of our faith. We have to learn how to be good people. That's how our soul gets prepared for heaven. So let me give you a brief example, a real life example of how knowing what a soul is, how it affects our actions, and not just jumping off buildings. As a priest, I very often have to go to difficult circumstances. People who are dying, going to the emergency room. So one night I get a phone call from the hospital, and they tell me that there is a young couple, who've lost their child. I know this is very sad. It's a sad story, but it's got a really important ending. And what they said was that the mother of this little child could not continue. She was pregnant, and she could not sustain the pregnancy. Her womb was not going to be able to continue, developing the child. So the child was 18 weeks old and would not be considered what you call a premature birth, nor a miscarriage. It was literally sort of a failure of the mother's system to be able to continue to support the child. So they induced labor, or they delivered the child, but it was only 18 weeks, and the child would not be able to survive. There's nothing they could do. So they called me to go minister to the family. And when I arrive, I see the doctor outside the room. And the doctor tells me that 20 minutes prior, the child had a heartbeat. Now, I didn't know this. I thought, when they told me to come, I thought the child had already died. It was kind of like stillborn. Not the case. I said, 20 minutes ago, the child had a heartbeat? And the doctor said, well, there really isn't a lot there. And I said, wait a second, I can baptize this child. I knew what the doctor was getting at when they said there's not a lot there, right? The doctor was kind of giving me this sense that, whatever, it's not a human being, it's a fetus and all this. So in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I'm not sure what I'm going to see. But I knew if the child was alive, then it has to have, right? If it's alive, it has to have a principle of life, right? So I go into the room, and the mother, very young lady, is holding this very little tiny baby. I can't remember the size. I mean, it was just so small, 18 weeks, right? I don't know, maybe a little bigger than a hand. Completely anatomically correct. And she wasn't crying or wailing. She was kind of, in a certain sense, in a little bit of shock and a little bit very tender with the child. And I said, it's a very difficult time. I know your child is not going to make it, and that's why we're here. But your child, if you think about it, is born to go to heaven. That's why the Lord put us together. This is what's happening. So I know you won't have the life of your child growing up, but you'll know that your child will be in heaven, because I'm going to baptize this baby. So I did. I actually took my holy water bottle, and I put 3 drops. I dropped 3 drops on the head. His name is Elias. And I said, I baptize you, Elias. I baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And I dropped 3 drops of water on his head. And because he was so small, each drop of water looked like a water balloon coming down. I thought it was just very interesting. And he moved. Right? It wasn't, he was still with us. This is very critical, right? Because later on, I call a friend of mine, somebody I've grown up with, somebody I'm close to. And I told him the story. And he says, well, I would say that the soul had not yet gone into that child, that is not really a baby, that the ensoulment has not occurred. You may hear this story before, but people who are like pro-abortion. And you realize what I'm trying to tell you is, that's not a possibility. It's almost like I want to tell people, like I want to tell the doctor, get out of my way. You may know about medicine. You don't know anything about souls. And I was going to tell my friend, like, I didn't want to be mean. I just said, listen, we're going to have to disagree. But you're not sounding rational. You're not even sounding scientific. You're sounding kind of ignorant. Because for something to be alive, it must have a soul. That's what a soul means. And if it's a human being, it has a human soul. And just because it's 18 weeks doesn't mean somehow it swaps out its vegetable soul with a human. No, it has a spiritual soul. And so that baby, thank God, I got the phone call. Thank God I went, not knowing what I was going to confront. But I was able to baptize that child because I knew what a soul is. I knew how it integrates with the body. I knew what it means to be alive and what a human being is. And so these types of things are very important for us in our daily life and in how we behave in our relationship with God and one another. So in last week's gospel, when we did the Mass, the gospel was really very providentially on the gospel we were reading that week was about a king who was having a wedding feast. The Lord is telling a story, Jesus telling a story, a parable about a king who wanted to throw a great wedding feast, a great feast. And he invited all these very important people, and all these people he knew. And they didn't want to come. They didn't show up. So the king was kind of disappointed. He said, the heck with them. Go out to the streets and to the fields and invite anybody who will come. And they went out and they gathered everybody to come in. And then when the feast is about to begin, he notices there's a man there without a wedding garment on. And it's kind of a stark statement. He goes, my friend, why are you not wearing a wedding garment? And he throws the man out of the wedding feast. You're like, that's unfair. This poor guy, they invite him off the street and he gets thrown out because he isn't dressed right. That sounds kind of mean. That's kind of a mean parable, Jesus, you know? In the ancient world, a king who was going to throw a feast like that would also not just provide the food, right, and the guests, he provided the wedding garments. So the idea being, when you think about it, our soul is not like a garment. We don't wear it. Our body and our souls are tied together as one unit, as I was saying. We're not like a little light beam. Our soul isn't like a little light beam in our body. It's part of what makes us alive. It's in us. It's all of us. But as a metaphor, as a parable, what's the story telling us? The Lord is inviting us to a great wedding feast in heaven, to be in communion with the King. And he gives us everything we need. He prepares the feast. He gives us what? A soul. He gives us the wedding garment so that we can be in the wedding feast. And why was this man thrown out? Not because he didn't have a soul, he wasn't offered a soul, he didn't give the gifts. He didn't care. He didn't care. He was invited to the feast and he didn't even care enough to wear the garment they gave him. He completely rejected it. It's a story for us too. That's what the Lord is saying. I'm inviting you to be in communion with me, to be in a feast with me, to actually spend eternity with me in the wedding feast of heaven. All I'm asking you to do is to take what I give you and use it for the purpose that it's meant, to know and love God and be in communion with him. And so I would just say, in conclusion and review, we have spiritual souls. The soul is the principle of life. Our principle of life is spiritual. It allows us to know and love God, and yet our soul is so amazing that it also allows our body to do everything else that we see in the world, like grow and move. But that's not the end purpose of our soul. The end purpose of our soul, it's made in the image and likeness of God to know and love God and love one another. Our soul is there to know the truth and to love the truth of God so that we can spend eternity with him. And so let us, in this life, learn what we have to learn, which is what we're trying to do in teaching you, and do what we're supposed to do so that we're taking care of our souls, whether it's prayer or going to church or making sure we avoid sin. So that's our lesson today. There'll be further lessons. I hope you enjoyed that. And think about it. Give us a call if it's confusing, because the idea of what a soul is so different than what we see in TV and the movies. We forget that we're not just computers, that we can do something bad and it doesn't affect us. Everything affects us. Every moral action we do affects us. And we want our moral actions to make us in the image and likeness of Jesus Christ.